After nearly 3 weeks of play in Warzone now, a meta is finally starting to emerge on what the best functional weapons are to use in order to succeed. Some may make sense, others you may not think about until you actually experience them firsthand, but today I want to give you a list of the top 10 weapons within Warzone so that you're aware of them and can hopefully use them to your advantage to end up getting some more wins. So as we go along, feel free to let me know your thoughts. By no means do I claim this to be a definitive list, but this is stuff that I've seen as the most effective through my time playing and the situations I've come across. So if you have any you'd like to add, feel free to in the comments below. As well, if you are new to the channel, do be sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all things Warzone and all things Modern Warfare content, especially as we round into Season 3 here and the big content up ahead in just a little over a week's time. That said, let's jump into it. Firstly, some parameters here for this. While trying to map out this video and find a structural flow of how I wanted to bring this list, I wasn't entirely sure about just talking in simple classifications like rifles, submachine guns, and the likes, because there are a couple that we have a couple in a few categories and maybe 1 to 0 in others where they're just not used at all. So I figured we could probably best discuss this in the manner of close quarter weapons, medium range weapons, and long range weapons. So with that in mind, let's start out with the early game where you're likely to need a close quarters weapon before all else. I know that I personally would prefer having an SMG over say a bolt action rifle right after I land and there's a player chasing me. If we're talking simply early game, well, one of the best ones you can find is that of the MP7. We're going to talk a lot about weapons that aren't actually just on the ground and weapons that you can actually kit out for yourself, so don't worry, this is the only one that kind of has ties to the ground that we'll talk about early on, but the MP7's a ground spawn, chest spawn, and of course something you could put in your loadouts. To me, I think it's an incredibly underrated weapon, though it is now finally starting to get its time in the limelight, but it can shred through armor with its rate of fire and thus allow you to secure kills with relative ease. The recoil as well as incredibly easy to manage, almost borderline non-existent, especially depending on how you end up kitting this out, so it's seriously a force to be reckoned with. Personally, I would highly recommend this combo with, say, a longer range weapon since, of course, it is an SMG and one that's more so focused to be an SMG. The next weapon we'll talk about can actually kind of rival some rifle play, but I'd recommend running this with some sort of sniper, which will give you my recommendation later on in the video for the best sniper. But the MP7, whether you find it on the ground or you end up using it in your loadout drop, seriously, it can work wonders, and it's become one of my favorites to use and can secure many a kills. Now, the next weapon I actually want to talk about first, but we mentioned ground spawns, and you don't really find this one on the ground or in chests, and it's only really worthwhile once you kit it out in your loadouts, that being the AUG with 5.56 rounds. Now, we talked about how this can actually rival some rifle play, and that's incredibly true. It has the fastest time to kill of all auto weapons, and the 5.56 gives this the damage profile of a rifle, but with all the handling of an SMG like you'd see with all the other statistics there. So you can kit it out to have some solid range depending on if you want to adjust the barrels. You can get that ADS speed up with the different grips you can throw on, and all things considered. The only thing that I would recommend to look out for is that sometimes the recoil in some scenarios can be a little bit tough to manage, but for the most part, especially if you're playing close quarters, you're going to shred through enemies, but also at range, you should be able to manage it. Definitely throw on that 60 round 5.56 round drum though. That will help you out big time in the long run. And of course, one cool thing also before we round into the next weapon is the fact that this still uses SMG ammo even when you convert it to the 5.56, which is the most abundant ammo type you have. I mean, if you drop in from the gulag right on top of your loadout drop, you have it because you had ammo in your pistol and in your reserve already. So that pistol SMG ammo conversion still works there, and it's fantastic. Next weapon we'll talk about is one that honestly, I hate so much going up against it because it always seems to just ruin the best games that I'm having, but I'd be lying if I said this wasn't one of the best weapons in the game right now, that being the RPG. Now, I am truly sorry for recommending this here, but it is incredibly powerful. I mean, it's a rocket launcher, but it can do stupid damage, and there really isn't any counter to it. Yes, you have EOD if you end up getting a loadout drop, but let's be real, you're probably not going to sacrifice cold-blooded for EOD, or at least I don't think that you really should. I'd imagine that you'd have more face-offs with, say, snipers, where cold-blooded could conceal your position and is a little bit more advantageous, but who knows? I mean, the RPG meta is increasing fast, so maybe EOD could be the next wave. But it also can be incredibly inconsistent at times, but in that same vein, it's consistent enough to infuriate you every time if you're killed by it. So with a max of 1 rocket and 6 in reserves, you got enough damage right there in your pocket for anti-vehicle engagements, close quarter squad wipes, or if it's just something that's the only thing you find on the ground early game, you can use it to your advantage. Moving on, because I don't want to talk about the bane of my existence too much, The next weapon we'll talk about in closing out the close quarters situations is that of the R9O. Now, we've recommended and talked about this in the past, but the R9O would be my top choice for the shotguns. I think it'd probably go the R9O, the Origin 12, the Model 680, and then the 725, at least in Warzone. But this being the double pump shotgun, if you ADS, you can exponentially increase that kill potential. But either way, you shred through armor with this thing, and in some cases, it can be a two-shot to players. Most times, I'd probably say you'd need a double pump it so you get off 3 or 4 shots that land, but it's still incredibly fast. This might not be too advantageous to many players unless you're rushing in to engagements and getting right in the face of the enemy, but if it is in close quarters, it's probably the weapon that I'd want the most. So definitely consider equipping that, maybe take a rifle for medium range, and then once you get close to an enemy, you can rush up on them and take them out with the R9O. Let's talk about that medium range here for a second, because there's one that I think is, at least in the sense of MP, I've always considered this to be the sort of hybrid between close and medium range engagements. And up until recently, I really hadn't given it all that much attention within Warzone, because I've always thought of it again as that weapon that I'd want to be closer to. And even then, still, it may not be the first choice for many players, but that being the M13. Now, in Warzone, and why it's becoming something that is a little bit more meta in recent times, is one value in particular: headshot efficiency. The math behind it can be linked in the description below to a wonderful post by Reddit user Soren Gun, but this weapon is exceptional for players with higher accuracies, especially at range. If you take the build of the M13, if you're hitting waist and limb shots, it's less than ideal and may not be your first choice, or shouldn't be your first choice. But if you end up hitting headshots, that's the kicker. If you can land headshots, it becomes incredibly fast in the time to kill department. And even further, it's killer at range. Once you start to get out of the range of the standard rifle, outwards of 60+ meters, the M13 with headshots is ranked the 8th fastest time to kill of all weapons in Warzone, and that's considering things like your one-shot snipers with headshots that will down immediately. But it's definitely a curveball weapon for sure, but if you can hit those headshots, close quarters, or even better at range, well, it's definitely a weapon worth trying out. Next, my go-to that's kind of just standard and all around that I don't think we really need to talk too much about is that of the M4A1. You pop on a monolithic suppressor with this thing, and it's already gone from the most versatile weapon in the entire game, likely, to something that has an even better damage range profile and also has that ability to keep you off the minimap and maybe keep your enemies guessing a little bit. But this one is honestly a go-to weapon and is likely going to be around Warzone and just, of course, standard MP for the entirety of Modern Warfare's life support. But the M4A1, if you're accurate with it, you can control that. Very minimal recoil already, and you toss on, say, a 60-round magazine, you're in for a good chance at winning a lot of engagements. So definitely give that one a try. But next, let's talk a little bit about the Grau 5.56. This weapon's been kind of the direct competitor to the M4 for quite some time now, and it really is an awesome choice all around. Very similar to how the M4 is as well. It has quite a few properties that make it fantastic for medium range engagements, but also the versatility of the weapon can be used in close quarters and also even at some longer range distances. I don't know that I would challenge a sniper rifle from 300 meters away, but it's something that can still give you a fighting chance. If you tap fire and tag an enemy once or twice, you may be able to get some team shots off that you can kill an enemy with that. But it is definitely one that I would highly recommend once you kit it out. Pop on a barrel to adjust those iron sights, pop on the monolithic suppressor to keep you off the radar, give you a little bit extra damage range, and as well throw on an extended mags attachment to keep you in the fight for just a little bit longer before having to reload. Then we'll talk a little bit about the RAM7 to close out our medium range engagement weapons, because this one has an incredibly fast TTK. This one I'd probably place at a more close quarters scenario, rather than say where I think the M4 and the Grau flourish a little bit further in those medium to maybe slightly outside of medium range engagements in where they stand out. But the RAM7 is incredible with its fast TTK and slightly faster with the M4 without headshots. But the versatility of this weapon as well makes it almost feel a little bit to me like kind of a hybrid between a longer range SMG and a closer range rifle. So it's definitely one that is situational and kind of depends on how you want to play the engagements, but it's definitely worth looking into, I think, also. But swapping over now to our final category of the long range, we got two weapons here in this one. Firstly, let's talk about my sniper of choice, the HDR. Now, realistically, it's up between the HDR and the AX50, both of the only weapons that can one-shot enemies to the head and down them with full armor. But why I choose the HDR is, well, for that bullet velocity. That means that you don't have to lead a target as much. You don't have to adjust your aim as much if you're going at a distance, because the bullet will travel faster and have slightly less arc than that of the AX50. The only thing that you're really missing out in terms of the HDR versus the AX50, if you choose the HDR, is the follow-up times that you have for the shots. The rate of fire is slightly faster on the AX50, but for the most part, that is something that doesn't affect me all that much, so I want to make sure that I can have that straightest shot possible, something that can do as much damage as possible, and so therefore, I run the HDR with this one. The final weapon we'll talk about today is that of the EBR. Now, this is one that normally I don't know if it would be in the top 10, it maybe just squeaks in on this list regardless, but the reason I'm including it is that it's now a ground and chest spawn, meaning that early game, it actually can be something that can really help you out. It has the potential to two-shot enemies in the head and is thus something that, again, early game, if you don't have all that much, you can maybe challenge something at a slightly medium to long range if you're accurate and still be able to pull that stuff off. But you can also kit this out, of course, if you have a loadout drop and you want to use it as either your primary or your secondary on said class, but it is one that I think just squeaks into that top 10. So other than that, that is where we're at here with that, and that is the top 10 weapons in Warzone in my opinion. So let me know your thoughts down there in the comment section down below. What do you guys think of this list? Anything you'd add or subtract from this list? Whatever it is, feel free to let me know. But that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you drop a like down below, and of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Modern Warfare and Warzone content, especially again with Season 3 looming right on the horizon. So hit that subscribe button if you're interested. If you guys also want to follow me over on Twitter and Instagram, those are the best places to get connected outside of YouTube. Practically on both those. If you guys want to strike up a conversation, ask me a question, whatever it may be, that link is down there in the description below. That said, thanks so much for watching. Minus the Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.